Hey, welcome back. Glad to have you. This is part 5 of my x-carve assembly process. Building my x-carve here in my office and then moving it to the basement where I'm going to be carving. So here I'm assembling the straps, or belts rather, for the x-carve. I started with the carriage, the z-axis belts. Now this one's a lot trickier. In the instructions they give some hints and some ways that you can use to get the belts fed through, but when you're feeding the belt through the top of the carriage, it's just real small and you can't feed it through the sides. So you have to start from the top and work it through, but if you just bend the belt and then slide it down, it's possible. It took me a couple of tries to figure out the process. But then the belts, I didn't see anything in the instruction. I don't know if they sent me the wrong size belt or if it was just the fact that they sent you enough for any size x-carve, but I had enough for 2. So they tell you to separate it out into 3 equal parts, then cut it. Now that part was made me pretty nervous to cut the belt into pieces. So I cut the belt, and then once I put it on, I realized I had enough for 2, for twice the length. So they may just send you enough for the 1000 millimeter. I'm using the 500 millimeter here, so I just cut it in half, and that enough. Next, they put on the stepper motor for the z-axis. Pretty easy to, once I got it hooked up, I just pulled it tight to where there was a good tension on the belt, and the bolts have like slots that you can put them through so that you can adjust the tension on it. So I just made sure that I had the tension tight before cranking it down real good. So then the y-axis belts are a lot simpler. It's just like the x-axis, only difference is you're able to slide it through the stepper motors on the side. A lot simpler. So this is actually pretty easy. I was surprised on this process of getting the belts through. The only thing that threw me off was just the length of the belts, and like I said, I'm not sure if it was that they send everybody the same length rather than having different length belts that they send out. But on the instructions, they said to make sure that on the tensioning, make sure that you set it up with enough thread so you can tighten it down later. And then of course the DeWalt router here, got the 611 adjustable speed, and it's pretty easy. You just slide it in and then tighten up the screws that we installed earlier, and pop open all the caps on the drag chain. Put the clip on this is on the back of the carriage, or on the z-axis. There's that support bar for the drag chain. Just tighten that down, and then here I'm putting in the probe for the Z probe. So wiring. So then I put all the wires in. The wires are all labeled on the ends of them, telling you where they go to, which stepper motor, because the cables are different lengths. I didn't see at first that there's actually words on the ends of it, each wire, but you can check it out and see which wire goes where. And then I tightened it down, hooked it all together here. They said this is the hardest part of the instructions. They said this part right here, snapping that on, and I edited out a lot of it because it was a little bit of work and I got in the way of the camera. But hooking up the drag chain is challenging. But here's that was the wire for the y-axis. Just hooking up that y-axis to the stepper motors and then securing them, and then homing switches right here for the y-axis. Then grabbing all the wires and getting them in the drag chain for the y-axis. All the wires go on this one, so it was kind of tight, but they all fit fine. there's a little bit of adjustment on the wires, and I wish there was another 6 inches on the wires just to give you some room. They're a little tight. And then setting up the X controller, it was exciting getting it all hooked up. I was a little nervous. I've been around some computers and building and replacing, adding some hard drives to stuff, but they explained it very well in the process of setting this up. They had in the instruction older models of the computer that they had for the X controller, and they showed what the differences were, side-by-side examples, and it's pretty easy to hook up. These the wires and everything was pretty simple. They give you, like right there, they warned you against pinching the wires, just told you to watch out when sliding components into the X controller. The E-stop button here, taking it off and putting it on the top plate and set it aside for later. So this is where I was a little confused, and it kind of had me concerned. Was in the instructions right here, they tell you that you have bolts and nuts, but instead I had those plastic pieces, which work just fine, but the instructions weren't updated on the website. So whenever I was going through it and installing those, I had a little bit of trouble. And it gave you the like what parts you should have for this section, and it had the screws listed, and that was incorrect on there, and that kind of, it threw me off. But when you have the parts laying in front of you and what's left, and then you kind of just figure it out that they've it's actually probably a better system what they have now, but it just wasn't updated in the instructions. And then finally getting it all together, at this point I was pretty elated, and just excited to get it finally finished, but nervous too, just because I've never done anything like this, and buying a $1,000 machine and hoping that it works when you plug it in can be kind of nerve-wracking. I put those green plugs on the back of the boards before I should have. They control the wire, so I had to unhook those so I could put this back plate on, and so just hold off on that. That was something else on the instructions. It showed the boards already having the wires on at some point, so I figured I missed a step, so I went ahead and snapped them on there, but you're supposed to wait. So once you get them all wired up, I didn't show that process because that was going to be it's pretty simple. It shows you on the instructions how to wire them up, which colors go in what sequence, and then you just plug it in. So the wires are kind of tight, so I was trying to pull them there, but here we go. Finally, after ordering this at Thanksgiving, 2 months later, here we are carving out the test carve. I was so excited. I just used a straight fleet bit and just went to town. I was just excited to get this thing up and going. It was a lot louder than I expected, but I tell you what, it really turned out good. And I got it set up, and I've had a few practice runs with it, and I'm excited to show future videos and projects. So here it is. I've done a few signs, just messing around with some of the stuff they have in there, but I appreciate you watching these videos, supporting me. Go ahead and subscribe, and I'll have more videos out here soon. Thanks.